there, bird nerds. I'm Grant. This is the bird emergency. Very, 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 very low key stream today, flying solo. And it's one that's pretty difficult to prepare for because it's really one where we need to talk about the concepts of using plants in containers. Can you hear me all right too, by the way? Um, and the combinations of plants that you can use is not one that you can really be prescriptive about if you don't know a lot about the setting, the place, the climatic conditions, the weather conditions, the amount of sun and whatnot. But what I want to do just quickly while I'm waiting to see if anybody's going to ask some questions or give a comment or two is to just show you a couple of lovely bird pictures. Let's start with that. Look at that. It's a honeyeater, but what's it on? It's on a grevillea. But here's another honeyeater, and it's on a grevillea, but it's a really, really different looking grevillea. Everybody knows Banksias. There's a white-cheeked honeyeater on a Banksia, but it may not be the Banksia that you are familiar with. The point I really want to get across is that I can show you a eucalyptus, and it's a lovely small Eucalyptus Tetracornis. I can show you another one, a small eucalyptus, but they're not the same. They're very, very different, but still they can be really well used in containers. You don't need to think of a grevillea or a Banksia or a eucalyptus being those common Australian plants that any nursery will be able to show you something of as being the big eucalyptus. Look at my background. Look at my background, he says. Well, you can't see me. Look at my background. Now, they're eucalyptus mostly in that shot. May well be some melaleucas in that shot as well. But these well-known genus or plant groupings are not, they might be best known for being trees, but in the Australian context, our common garden variety plants have got small plants, small species, or small horticultural varieties, cultivars, that you can use in your containers. What's a container? That might be a good question. A container is anything that isn't the ground, in my view. Pipes, pots, obviously, decorative pots, tall, narrow pots, wide, tubby kinds of pots, bathtubs, old tanks, anything at all where your roots are contained and not free to spread in the ground. Using containers brings its own challenges, but it also gives you lots of advantages. And those advantages are that you can control the type of soil medium that you use, and you can also better control the application of water, and you can also better control the rate of drainage. And these are all important things if you want to have healthy, happy plants. Now, my interest is in native Australian plants generally, but I'm happy to field questions or comments about anything. I'm an all-round horticulturist, so I can certainly help you out with that. But let's start while we're waiting to see what kind of input we get. I hope you can hear me all right. I think my earpieces might be. Oh no, there we are. That's better. I always get disappointed when I see people with these beautiful large pots. I'll stick to you calling them pots, but they might be made of clay, terracotta. They may be, nowadays metal formed containers are really popular. They might be small raised garden beds in a courtyard, but they're all the same thing for our purposes. And then people have just got like one plant stuck in the middle. That's really unimaginative, and it also doesn't help. It doesn't build um, a any kind of habitat. If it's an upright little tree, well, that's not going to be conducive to get visitations. If you have small birds, it's certainly not helping frogs, lizards, skinks, and all those kind of things. So, um, I, I want to revisit or talk about again that idea that we talked about in a earlier stream we did with Holly about, even though you can be talking about small pots rather than your yard or a landscape in general, you still need to talk about, or you need to think about the layers, so the different heights that are involved, and then bring your thinking down in scale. So when we're talking about pots, be they small pots, maybe that 20 centimetres, 200 millimetre, which is sort of 8 inch in the old language size, up to, the really big buggers that take, 5 people to move around. You've got to be thinking of those as distinct entities in themselves if you're going to be trying to create an environment. So you also need to allow a method for animals to use them, to access them. So if they're not insects and birds flying in, they need to have some kind of a ladder. And the best kind of a ladder to get animals into that, to access that reservoir of soil and the nutrients and the microcosm there. Perhaps you've got fungi and other critters in the bacteria and whatnot in the soil, is to have something overhanging that will then reach to the ground or to the next pot or to well, a path perhaps, but to the ground. So always think about, with a big pot, is starting your thinking with a climber or a ground cover that can trail over the side of your pot. I like to 3s and 5s are good numbers for design in pots like that. So you would have something leaning over, you would have a small shrub, and they're very small, obviously, if they're only going to be football size or smaller, and then something upright in the background. Now, I was really hoping that we'd be getting some people asking some questions or making some comments, so that I don't just wander on and talk endlessly. So if you do have a comment or a question, we'll start there. I'm just going to show you some more lovely birds on some flowers. Now, this one, the flower or the plant in this picture, is a New Zealand native, and it's a Metrociderus. It's part of the Myrtaceae family, which has got the callistemons and melaleucas and eucalypts and whatnot in it. A huge family worldwide. But you can get beautiful looking plants that have an aesthetic appeal, functional in the landscape, but also dinner, breakfast for the birds, and that's the Scarlet Honeyeater. I showed this before, but again, really, really popular Banksia. Now, this is one that flowers on the terminal end of a shoot or a branch. So that's where you get that beautiful shot of the birds sitting on top of a flower, sort of on the top of the bush. This one I really like because it's a salvia. That's the sage. They're super popular now in so many colours, but great tucker for the birds. So you are not limited if you want to bring birds and other animals into your garden by just thinking about Australian native plants. If you're my age, everyone's grandma and their old aunties had lots and lots of geraniums or pelargoniums in their gardens. Well, here we go. There's a white-cheeked honeyeater on a geranium. I'm sure you will recognise the geranium. When we did the show last week, I was amazed I didn't actually talk about correas. One of my favourite plants to use in the eastern states is the correa. Correas in the Rutaceae family, which is in the same family as roses, but also closely related to Boronias. Extremely useful plants for containers and the landscape. Hold their foliage really, really densely, nice and glossy. So many of the species are glossy. Others have there are glaucous ones, and there are some that are sort of furry in their feel, warty in their feel. Really, really, really great, and slightly fragrant, the foliage. But this one is one of my favourites, the chef cap correa, and you can probably tell why looking at the calyx, the upper part of the flower there that holds onto the petals. Looks like the old style chef cap. But nectar dependent honey eaters and similar love them. Let me go back to some of the small eucalypts. I could have got thousands of pictures of eucalypts, but in pots, now they're going to generally need a large container, but they do play nicely with a mixed planting in a container, and you can find very small varieties, mallee style generally, that do well in containers, but their flowers, not only are they abundant, and you would probably know that the honeyeaters love them, but look at the cap and look at the seed pods. So they give you interest all of the year round, no matter if they're at the peak of flowering or at the end. I mean, let's go back and have a look at the seed pods again. Marvellous. And you can get them in so many colours. So where are we? Okay, go back to a couple of grevilleas. Now, I think this session's only going to last for a long time. Or if I do get some feedback or do get some questions, let me get rid of that one, and we'll come back to me. There we are. It's really underutilised, I think, the container as a essential part of everyone's gardens. I know I was late to this. Even after I studied horticulture, I was still always thinking in that larger scale of the backyard, and always thinking, I mean, when I was doing designs for people and, uh, doing designs for the businesses I was working for, for customers, I always was thinking about doing the whole yard. And as I've got older and talked to more and more people who are living in shared accommodation or in units, or have even become, you know, into caravan parks, or are living a highly mobile kind of life. Um, Highly mobile, not so much mobile, maybe that we're moving around, that people are more likely to be spending less time in the one dwelling. That if you're investing 5 or 7 years in seeing a plant get to maturity, and um, it's, at its height of its appeal, maybe you don't want to leave it behind. Maybe you want to be able to move it. So containers, pots are a really great way to do that. So let's go back a little bit to what I was saying about starting your thinking with having something cascading over the edge of the pot. Even really decorative pots still benefit from having something to soften the lip and to draw the eye up from the ground up to the pot. Um, Here we are. I'll interrupt there. Here we go. Here's the first question. Oh, hello, Janice. What can you use in the garden to discourage noisy miners? Okay, noisy miners prefer a sort of open. Um, they they if you have a neighbourhood, or if your backyard uh, can be functional like an open woodland, that's really conducive to noisy miners. What they don't like is really dense plantings. Um, so I'm not really familiar, Janice. Maybe you could tell me a little bit more about your situation. But I would be I would be looking, if I was going to be designing or adding something to your garden, I would be looking at lots of foliage, dense foliage. Um, and one way to think about what are useful plants for that is to think of plants that have that hold their foliage densely, and that are hardy, which is a horrible term that's in the horticulture trade. But plants that are good for hedging, if you don't use them as a hedge but you let them actually bulk out, they're nice and dense. And then you've got to think about that idea of layers. So a tall one, a medium one, and then two shorter ones to create a dense patch of bush. Noisy miners like the open woodland. So one tree over here, one tree over here, a shrub over here, which is why they do so well in our suburbs, because that's essentially what we create with our streetscapes. Uh, a tidy neighbourhood is conducive to birds like that. It's again. So Janice has got another response in. So do you have is that a question, or is that a statement of what you've got in your in your garden now, or if what it's based on? Like, do you have a big backyard, Janice? Tell me, um, put a few sort of ideas of what your backbone of your situation is, and we'll see if we can come up with a good couple of suggestions. I'm especially interested if you already have an overstory, like if neighbours got big trees and whatnot that overhang out. Um, okay. Well, what you need to do, Janice, because I think that's a continuation of basically a hedge type. I think you need to be using plants that are otherwise good for hedging. So the reason I suggested it for that, if you go down to your nursery and you look for, and if you want to go native, Australian native, you'll be looking for plants that do hedge well to be dense. So lots of the grevilleas, Grevillea rosemarinifolia, Grevillea scheresii, two of my absolute favourites, but there's stacks of them now. Grevillea victoria is another one. Dimorpha, there's Firebird. There's so many good ones that you can use. But the idea is that you plant them close together. So if your label on your plant says it will grow from 1 to 3 meters, well, let's go at 1.5 is the average size. To plant them closely together, you are planting them at, say, 1 to 1.5 meter centres. You're not planting them like so many people do, and this is where the gardens look terrible. You're not planting them at like a 3 metre centre. If you are trying to discourage noisy miners, you want denser shrubbery. The benefit of that, if you do it that way, is that that's what most of the wrens prefer, and things like your scrub wrens and your thornbills and things like that do prefer a denser planting. Okay, Janice again. Large tall gum trees, callistum and grevilleas, heaps of bromeliads and agave. Is that what I'm thinking? Okay, agave. I'm thinking they're going to be the big agave, which is the darling of the modern landscape architect and the unimaginative property developer. Those, until agaves and whatnot, until they're flowering, they offer nothing to our native birds. So they're I'd ignore them. Bromeliads are really useful for frogs and insects. So bromeliads mixed in amongst other plantings and especially in pots on the ground, especially in a garden bed, which is pretty lacking. And this is where, when you're a renter, you'll go into the backyard and there'll be half a dozen larger trees, or medium-sized trees, and some large shrubs, probably pruned incorrectly for 20 years, really, really ugly, and you'll have a narrow garden bed. Well, your option is then to get a whole lot of pots like bromeliads and things and pop them in between. Water reservoirs for insects and amphibians and lizards, so really good. But that's also where you would like things to be able to get up into them. You mentioned callistemons. Callistemons are an underutilized genus for small gardens, because there's so many varieties of callistemons out there that can be the small or medium shrub as a basis. But your local nursery should have the ones, that are good for your area. Obviously, there's going to be a big difference from the ones that will do well in Melbourne to the ones that will do well in, semi-tropical Queensland, or in the, more in the inland. I would also be thinking, Janice, of syzygiums, the lily pillies. There's so many new ones out on the market that are small and compact, and some of those might be worth considering. They're probably going to be available. I'm always reluctant to give specific species recommendations because I'd from one day to the next, you don't know what's going to be available in the nurseries. I did notice the other day after last week where we were talking about difficult spots in the garden, and I recommended a nursery which I know is great for tube stock. I've been using them for like 20 odd years. They got a great website. They never used to. So I discovered their new website, and they used to just print like a 5-page catalogue, typed out catalogue. It was a beauty. But on their website, so many stuff was out of stock, and I think we're at the tail end of the lockdown, the COVID period, where it might take a year or two to get a cutting to be a marketable plant in a 6 or 8 inch pot. If any of these nurseries were down on production in the last 2 years, there's obviously a follow on there. So a lot of plants might be difficult to get. Janice, do you like propagating? Do you like growing your own plants? Tell us that. And if you, let's see. Hello, Facebook. Facebook's very popular today. Hello, Twitch as well. Have you had any? This is for everyone. I'd be really interested if you had any spectacular fails in pots. People my age probably have always tried a Daphne, or somebody's given them a Daphne for a present, and then it's been a terrible fail. Gardenias are another one that people get given as gifts, and then they flame out once they've potted them up and put them on the porch. Do we still have porches anymore too? I'm really old. Excuse me while I have a coffee. I'll mention a few more of the genus. Here we are. Okay, all right. Dad's right into it. Thanks, Janice. Okay. If you want to try things that are a bit exotic, exotic's probably absolutely the wrong word to use in the Australian sense. Just bear with me. I'm just going to look up what the right web address is for what I'm going to recommend, and then I'm going to here we are. Just bear with me for a second. There we are. Okay. If you're into propagation and you want to grow things that you probably will have trouble finding in the nurseries, Nindathana Australian Seeds, they now call themselves, nindathana.net.au, Nindethana. We'll just make a little banner so you can write it down at your leisure. Now these guys, or these people, let me scroll it across. There we are. Hope that helps. They have a massive range of Australian native seeds, legally and ethically as much as it can be collected, and you can buy little tiny packets, so just for a couple of plants, up to broadacre direct seeding quantities. So check them out if you're interested in anything in particular. I'll let that run for a little while. Let's see Facebook. There's many of you on Facebook. So how about you tell me or ask me something about what you would like to achieve. Do you have pots? That's really the first question. Do you have pots now, or have you been thinking about using them, or are you limited to using them? Somebody did hit me up on Twitter, and so they wanted to talk about balconies. Balconies are great because you have that opportunity to use the trailing nature of many plants. So you can use small and light creepers to increase your coverage, your leaf area, your and there's so many great ways to use the foliage, as well as it signals to birds, insects as they're passing that this is a cool place. But there are challenges in those kind of situations, which is generally watering and moisture retention. So does anyone have any problems for that? I can help you with those kind of issues as well. Does anyone have a favourite potted plant? I love the small eucalypts in pots. Even everyone knows it as the silver princess, Eucalyptus. I always called it Acacia in my whole young life, but I'm not sure if that's actually the correct pronunciation. But the silver princess, or the Kangaroo, or the Gunganoo, which is a arid southern Australian plant from sort of South Australia through into Western Australia, where it naturally occurs. Beautiful plant for its bark, for its form. It's a lovely open weeping form. Mature when it's mature, the bark is a feature, and of course it has the beautiful soft pink to dark pink flowers with gold tips of the stamens. So and a really decorative flower cap and cup. Winner on all accounts. But if you've got a big container, and by big I mean one that you can hug, they're a beautiful plant to use as your upright feature in a mixed planting. And then you can put something which, the Boronia, Coria, Melaleuca, small, especially a rounded shape Melaleuca. And then you can use maybe a grass or a kangaroo paw or something as a upright, taller feature. Recio, although they like it a little bit drier, but a kangaroo paw is an ideal one to think of there. One of the larger ones, maybe the yellow or the reds, are maybe a touch tall, depending on the size of the container. And then something spilling over, like a glycine or the running postman, the Canedia prostrata, or ground cover grevillea, perhaps. So, right, help me out. Help me out with a comment or a question, because it's really hard to prepare for this, where I don't know where you're from, and I want to be able to suggest things that are useful to you. I suppose I can take up that idea for a second about bark. Bark as a feature, especially if you're using a container that is larger than sort of the 8 or 10 inch, which is 200 to 300 mil kind of size. You can be looking for plants that have decorative bark. And who would have thought? Acacias. September. It's wattle month. The wattles are bursting out into flower now. There's lots of wattles with really interesting trunks once they're mature, and there's some amazing leaf forms. Acacia aphylla. You may not have heard of that one, but that's a ripper if you want a grey green leaf, and it is like spiky, so it looks like a lot of these succulents that are really popular nowadays, but they also have little yellow ball flowers popping out. So, all right. Come on Facebook, come on Twitch, come on YouTube. Give me some red meat to feed on here. Do you have a favorite? Like, would you like to use some wattles and you don't know any to use? We could probably ask that question for callistemons and melaleucas as well. Corias. I mean, you can really write down 5 or 6 common genus of Australian plants and build a garden pretty much around them. If you said Grevillea, Banksia, and Banksia now includes all the Dryandras. Let's add Hakea in. You got Eucalyptus. Did I say callistemon already? Say Coria. You can pretty much do your ground covers, your large and small shrubs, and your large shrubs and your trees out of all of those. And there are small tree forms that will lend themselves to pots for everything. So, hey, ask me to give you a suggestion. I'm wondering, Janice, I'm hoping you're still with us, that whether I've given you anything useful or if you want more. I'm hoping that your dad will go, Nindathana seeds, yeah, let's check them out. Let's get some Eucalyptus rhodantha or some I don't know, help me out. I'm getting radio silence. And now, if you're a regular watcher of the show, you will now know why I always like to have a guest. Okay, I'm gonna hang on for another few minutes, and let me run through. Wouldn't you love to be bringing these guys into your garden? And you might notice that when I was going through preparing for this, and I was looking for pictures of birds on native plants, and of course, thanks Janice for the like too as well. Nearly everything was a honeyeater, and I think that's basically because that's what we notice. So does that mean Janice's dad is on the live? Hi, Janice's dad. I'm pretending to be Costa. That's why I let my beard grow. Let me get this out. So Janice's dad, tell me what kind of gardening you're into. You can just pop a comment in the. I'm guessing you're going to be on Facebook. Let me have a look. Yep, I'm guessing you're probably on Facebook, unless you're on Twitch. Might be one of the gamers on Twitch, hey? What kind of gardening are you mostly into, and what do you use? Do you use containers as a large part of your garden structure? You have to give him a prod, I think, Janice. Janice, fill me in. I forget where you are. Let me know where you are, and then I can maybe give you a few more great suggestions. Were we talking about the Boronias the other day? Is that? Oh, just wait. Oh, the Gold Coast. Okay. There we are. Just so you know that I didn't make that up, everyone. Okay, so on the Gold Coast, well, are you in the hinterland, or are you in that sort of and have you got a sunny spot, or are you in a shaded spot? That's one of the main limitations. If you've got a shady spot and you have to use containers, that really does limit the suite of plants. But things like Boronias then really come into their own. Hybertias, Ostromertus, all the syzygiums, or the lily pillies, as they're known in the trade. And then you can look at the figs. Now I'm thinking that the wetlands there is one of the places. Hello, Naomi. There we go. We were talking about the Boronias. Okay, yeah. Janice, what I want to know from you, Janice, is if you are currently using containers, or if you've got a fair bit of space. Let me in there. But Naomi, welcome. Thank you for joining again. Since we last chatted, Naomi, or since the last stream, have you been out and checked out your local nurseries for Boronias to see if any of the other ones were available? I did make some notes for the Boronias, but I haven't got them on the up on the web page yet. Let me get to my folder with the Boronias in there. I wanted to tell you about where are we? I think I told you you're in. That's right. Okay, good. Thanks, Naomi. There's your Facebook. Yes, Springwood didn't have them. Okay. Yeah. I think what I might do, Naomi, is you should email me, Grant at the Bird Emergency, or DM me on Twitter with a email address. There's my Twitter handle on the screen there. I might give you like a half a dozen options. That actually gives me another thought. Eriostemens. Who hasn't used an Eriostomen in their garden? That might be a good one too, for you, Janice. In another idea, they're really commonly available in the trade, and the Eriostemens have got a bit of scented foliage, so that if you brush past it, you get it's not really lemony, but it's about the nearest thing I can equate it to when the foliage is bruised or you're brushing against it. So it does have that sort of that feature, but it's got a beautiful white star flower, but really adaptable. Doesn't mind getting periodically inundated, and also can survive a fairly dry period will handle shade and sun. So good, good one. Now let's say, okay. Anyone else got a question or a problem that they would like to pose? It's all Facebook action today. Hello, Facebook. Hello, Facebook. Oh, I did have another question that I was going to ask you. I'll ask you all too. Would you prefer if I was to do, because I think the consensus last week was that more bird adjacent plant conversations would be welcomed, but would you prefer them to be during the day? And if it was during the day, would you prefer it on a weekend? Or would you prefer, is it easier for you to be involved or to come along, to join in if it's in an evening? Just, I'll wait for your answers, class. Come on, class. I can be fairly flexible and I'd like to plan ahead a bit further if we're going to do plant ones. For one, I don't want to steal people's images, so I can go out looking for good images for what we're talking about. But once I can settle on a time, if you would prefer weekends or evenings rather than like a midday or an early afternoon during the week. Okay. Naomi's saying daytime. Is that because you can log in with one earbud in at work, Naomi, or is that because you're at home? Anyone else? What do you think, Janice? We got a YouTube. I don't know where YouTube is today. They don't want to talk to me today on YouTube. I'm happy to fit it in. I'd like to do maybe weekly or fortnightly, depending on what you'd be interested in. I did once write out a list of what I thought would be good gardening topics, and I got to about 100. So I figure there's plenty to talk about. But I like to be led by you guys because I think there's nothing more boring than sitting in front of a screen going, yes, I'm the expert on everything. I'd like to tell you my opinion. I'd much rather react to questions and comments because, well, for one, it gets you forearmed. Hello, YouTube. Nice to see you popping in on YouTube. It's really to help you guys go and find the plants you need. Okay. So, Janice, just on that, breaking that train of thought, just on that, are you more likely to prefer a weekday or a weekend or an evening? Because I can set my calendar up and do either. Just need to be organised like the rest of us, hey? That really did break my train of thought. Interesting that we're not getting much anyone from the regions or from the interior. Maybe I need to work harder on that. I'd also be interested in knowing what your local nursery is like. You don't need to name them if you don't want to. If you want to give them a plug, we certainly will. We don't need to be too critical of anyone. But I'm just wondering what you're finding the range of your local nursery is like, or whether they are, well, if they cater to you, or if your local nursery is now a cafe with a bit of plant attached. I think we're all familiar with the move that's happened, certainly over my time in horticulture, where you used to go to a nursery and it was jam-packed full of all sorts of weird and wonderful plants and handwritten labels and all sorts of oddities, and now they're beautiful places to walk around and go and have a coffee get a bagel or a open sandwich with some smoked salmon, but it's pretty hard to find a really good range of plants these days. There we are. Thanks, Janice. Okay, night and day, any day. So I'm guessing you've got some flexible work arrangements that shift, that change about over time. Yeah. Thanks for responding to my queries too. Okay, now this is an interesting one, Naomi. Glenbrook Native Plant Nursery is brilliant, but not often open. Yeah, Springwood. I think Springwood are catering to their market, aren't they? In that it isn't. I mean, aren't a lot of people there on fairly large blocks, and a traditional English style garden is really common, really prevalent there. I'm just looking up. Well, if you notice that I'm typing on I might be shaking. Glenbrook Native Nursery. I just want to have a look and see who and what they are. Would that be the Glenbrook Village Nursery? Would that be the one? Yeah, camellias and azaleas. So that would have been my thought, Naomi. Camellias, azaleas, maybe things like the cornice, the dogwoods, and maybe lots of maples, all the different varieties of maples and whatnot. And I've got to say, I'm a big fan of camellias and azaleas, rhododendrons and whatnot. But when we're talking about habitat, trying to create habitat, we're not going to get much of it. There, okay. I'm looking for. So is the Glenbrook Village Nursery the nursery we're talking about? Or is there a different one? No, it's a specialist plant nursery. Okay, let me. See, I can't even locate them on the web. Here we go. No, I can see the Glenbrook Native Plant Reserve. Yeah, I can't even find them online with a. Hello, Jennifer. Jennifer Bergenson, thank you very much. So hang on, I'm going. Jennifer and is Jennifer mum Naomi? Have I jumped to the wrong conclusion? Yeah, I can't find the Glenbrook Native Plant Nursery on a cursory search. So I'm guessing it's more a labour of love or a hobby rather than a real serious commercial enterprise, which probably means that they hello Naomi's mum. Nice to see you. So I had Naomi's mum and Janice's dad. It's a family affair today. That's great. Naomi's mum. How about you tell us what kind of gardening you're most interested in? And Naomi, I'll ask the question that I put to Janice a bit earlier. Do you have any particular issues or challenges with your garden, and are you using containers? Fill me in a little bit so that I can be your personal horticulturist for the next 15 or 20 minutes. while I drink cold coffee, but it's a very nice coffee I've got today. And I like to show off my mug. Isn't that a good mug? Okay, I'll just chat quietly. How about grasses? How many of you are using, like when you are thinking about if you're starting a new little project on a new patch? Thanks there on Twitch. PogJava69. Thank you very much. It is a nice mug. Do you want to know the mug story? Would you like to know the story of this mug? Cost me $1. Cost me $1 at Target. They were chucking out mugs. Can you believe it? Getting rid of a whole lot of mugs. And that was their luckiest story ever. $1. $1 for the best cockatoo mug ever. Now, Naomi, I'm going to take issue with you there. Every situation, everyone can use containers. And one of the great things about containers, especially if it's in an established garden, is that you can, say you've got a garden bed which is already full. If you feel like you haven't got any room for anything and you're in a garden bed, you can get some of those really good upright planters, or even those pipes which you often see around the place, that give you an opportunity then to maybe be able to use some of those ground cover grevilleas that can be used as a carpet. And so many of those toothbrush flower grevilleas have amazing flowers, long flowering periods, and are bird attracting. But if you've already filled up your garden bed, you can't put a ground cover in, or it might be too shady for a ground cover. But getting something like a pipe enables you to do it. And they only need a really small space for the root zone, so you can basically fill it up with some rubble, or even just stick some timber in and build a platform that you then can just have a small spot for your root zone, and it won't be really, really, really heavy, but it will give you some options. Here we are. Yeah, well, I do like gardening. I'm a horticulturist by training, but I didn't. I stopped working in horticulture a number of years ago. But now that I'm such a bird nerd, plants and birds go together. Horticulture goes with it. So, yeah, I love Australian native plants. They've always been one of my hobbies. Oh, hello. People are streaming in. Maybe I got the times wrong today. Maybe we should have started at 1 o'clock and not at midday. Actually, that's a question for you all. That is a good question for you all. Would later in the day be better than the midday? All right, hang on, Naomi. You'll have to tell me what are you interested in there? Is that the pipe? Is that what you were thinking about? There's also containers, Naomi. You think really broadly. If you don't have a water garden, if you don't have a pond, you can buy containers, seal up the bottom, and get lots of little ponds. Pop them around everywhere. That gives all the amphibians, many different other insects, the lizards, and any birds access to water in different spots. And look, we talked about this a long time ago on one of the streams with Holly, is that when you're thinking about the the garden and providing water for birds, particularly. Some birds want their water in the open. Some don't mind it if it's near the shrubbery, so they can quickly get away and hide. So containers give you the idea, or give you the opportunity. Plus, having lots, maybe 2 or 3 is more than enough. That you might have one with frogs. You might be able to have fish in one. You can have maybe the floating azolla or something on the top of one, but water lily, and there's native water lilies. You know that you can use. You can stick some of the restio, the really grasses that love moisture in them. So there's so many great ways to use them. So I'll just pop that one up. So yes, I do think that's a really good idea. So we've got where are we? Here we go. Pog Java. Now is POG Java 69? Is that something to do with coffee? Because don't you guys call that coffee over there? Home Depot, you're obviously in the States, so that's great. Yeah, azaleas are really adaptable plants. Like there's so many good. I imagine it's the same over there. We've got thousands of varieties of azaleas, and azaleas are just small rhododendrons. You're probably aware of that. In an Australian context, the main thing with azaleas is to be sure that you buy a full sun variety if you're going to use them in full sun. But in general, they're a part shade kind of plant. Naomi, do you have a resident pair of kingfishers or a couple in your area? And do you know if they're the sacred kingfishers? Okay, so Pog. Okay, thank you, Pog Java. I didn't know that Pog meant cool or awesome. I always wondered what poggers were. Okay, now I get it. Okay, so it's cool Java. I know that's a coding language. Okay, so you're a nerd. Is that how you found Bird Nerd? I'm just wondering because you're on Twitch and my handle on Twitch is Grant Bird Nerd. So I wondered if you were searching nerds or something and you got it. And 69 is just because you forgot the password. Okay, at least that's the 69 you're referring to. Very good. Okay, so you've got the sacred. So you probably do have a pair, Naomi, I would reckon, but you just have only got one that's hanging around quickly. Have you got a watercourse near you too, Naomi? That's another question I would like to know. Same with you, Janice. Are you near a creek or a river in the at the Gold Coast? Oh, well, good. Thanks. I'm glad you found us. I hope you're liking our Australian native plant content, and I hope you like birds. Pog Java 69. We might call you Poggy for short if we're going to be friends. Yeah. So Naomi, Janice, if you're both still interacting, tell us if you've got a local. Okay, Naomi, here we go. Thank you. So you've got billabongs. Okay. Now that prompts me to ask Naomi, do you find frogs in your garden frequently? And are you mulching, Naomi? Since you are living in you've got your own place. Big birds. Well, do you count emus as being terrifying, Pog Java? I would be interested in that. I will say that the Philippines eagle is extremely terrifying. But no, I'm not going to call a emu terrifying. Okay, so you do get frogs. That's great. So that's another reason for asking is that if you've already got frogs, that means you've got pretty healthy. Emus are way cooler than ostriches, by the way. Yeah, so Naomi, if you've got frogs around, they're a real asset. It shows that you've got a fairly healthy ecosystem going on in your confined space. But they do like a number of places to find refuge, just in case the kingfishers do get around. So you want a few places that they can spawn. Yeah. Oh, well, Naomi, on that mulch question, do you mulch? I should have probably been a bit broader with that. Is there mulch? Is really the question. It's good. See, you're not tidying up incessantly, obviously, which means that your leaf litter is obviously having time to break down. So that gives everything, your insects, all your soil microorganisms, a go. Here we go. Thanks, Poggy. That's good. Cassowaries are very much like emus with steroids. Yeah, they're like emus that haven't slept for a month and that someone's been prodding them with their elbow in bed. Yeah. Do not get in the way of a cassowary. That is certainly advice worth heeding. Let's get back on plants for a little bit. Anybody got a question? Naomi, you've got a couple of ponds. Are they ponds that you're happy with? Ponds are a real good source of frustration, I found. And if you have fish in them, do you protect them from the kingfishers? Have you had to use any sort of mechanical means of intervention, like some submerged wire, or do you just let the water lily leaves act as shelter or something for them? So, oh, that's way too cold to go on with now. Well, we're going to count down any last contributions. So yeah, I am open to you contacting me in my DMs or on email too if there's any specific questions that you would like to put to me, or suggestions for a future bird adjacent plant live stream. Just having a look. I've got Nindathana streaming below there. They've been going 70 years. Can you believe that? Just thought I'd throw that one in. Naomi contribution. Oh, what? You tidied up your fish? Oh, no, you tidied up your fish. You do have frogs, but you don't have fish. Okay. Yeah. Probably good if you don't have colourful carp. Okay, I'm going to give you a couple more minutes to think about a question or a comment or a problem or something. If you do have suggestions for future streamies, here we go. Oh, good, Naomi. Very good, very good. You've got the native lilies. Good. Have you got the yellow ones? And the elephant ear, which I'm guessing you're talking about the alocasia. Yeah, they will self-seed everywhere. Weed potential, so don't let them get near a stream or anything, because they can end up, those seeds can end up anywhere, in any kind of gully or anything. Become very difficult if they're let to get mature to get out. So yeah, great. So you got the nice little yellow ones. Excellent, excellent. Oh gee, I'm reluctant to give myself more work to do to maybe come up with a few plant lists. We're talking about containers mostly today. Live streams are always fun because you never know where they're going to go. Thanks, Poggy, too, for joining in over there from the States, from the original Bunnings, Home Depot. Fantastic. Don't know if you know, Pog Java, we've got we've got a copycat over here called Bunnings, which has just taken over. And I used to work for Bunnings when they were brand new. I think I worked in like their fourth or fifth warehouse on this side of the country, way before they became part of the conglomerate. Yeah, Naomi, they're not the elephant ear, the alocasia, I think, is what we're talking about. It's not a rampant weed, but once it becomes established, it's really hard to get out. But if they have been seeding and they're in an area where water will disperse them, they do keep going. Here we go. Peter. Hi, Peter. Welcome aboard. Okay. I want you to tell me two more things, Peter, so I answer the right question. Is it that you want to be able to manage plants that have grown for a couple of years in a pot and that are becoming root bound? Or do you also have the issue about how to maintain a mature plant that is not necessarily going to die from root bounding, but maybe nutrition or water? Okay, that's a good question, right, Peter? I'm going to make sure, I'm going to rephrase it so I get it sure. I'm thinking what you're telling me is that maybe you've got a few big pots, and you've done what everyone does is, great, let's go and get a ballerina crabapple or something, or look good, let's put a kumquat in it, or whatever plant it is, and you put it right in the middle and you fill it, you backfill and everything and beautiful, and then you've got a bare pot with a plant. Is that am I on the right track there, Peter? I'll just take that off, because that's the way we've always done it, right? We've always been conditioned for that, and we think about plants need room and you've got to let them spread and it's just been the traditional way that horticulture has been taught and discussed on all the garden shows and everything, and blah blah blah. And my contention is that unless you are very particularly wanting to have your particular specimen plant in a pot, that's just the wrong way to go. Because guess what? Do plants grow that way? You walk out in the bush and you see one plant, and a neat 3.5 meters away, you've got another plant, and then 3.5 meters away, you got another plant. That's bullshit. That's just not the way it happens, right? Plants grow in communities. They're used to it. They are adapted for it. reducing competition for some plants is absolutely required, but for others it isn't. And you can also manage your plants, your collection of plants, in a way that takes competition into account by mulching, by fertilizing, and by applying appropriate irrigation where required. So, Peter, what I always think about now when we're talking about gardening or using plants, with the main purpose being to provide habitat in an urban setting, which is where I'm focused on here. So I'm not talking about to get the best hydrangea possible, the biggest blooms. Okay, maybe you do only want one hydrangea in a pot, but that's not what we're talking about, because hydrangeas are not habitat plants for Australian birds and animals and insects and whatnot. Snails love them. Yeah, I'll give you that, right? Is it every pot I like to think of, every container is a community on its own. So then you need to be selecting the plants that share that container for having approximately the same or similar requirements as if they were planted in the ground. So you obviously don't put a desert plant in with a rainforest plant, because you're not going to be able to keep them both happy with any kind of irrigation regime. But what I will say, Peter, for general upkeep for plants that are becoming root bound, when you select your plants that you are going to use in a pot, think of that natural progression that will need to happen as they grow. So if you are selecting, we talked about an eriostemon before, okay, earlier on. Now, an eriostemon might grow happily in a container to 1.5 to 2 metres wide, but it's got to get to that stage. So buy it in a 140 mil / 6 inch pot. Be prepared in a year to pot it up into an 8-inch pot, then into a 10-inch, then into a 12-inch, and then finally into a larger one. That will mean that the plant can keep growing its roots without becoming root bound. But if you do find that roots are starting to circle, cut them. Cut them. If the thing that will kill the plant is that it strangles itself by growing round and round and round in circles. But plant roots only grow round in circles if they're trying to grow out and they can't go any further. So you do want to stagger the growth of the plant from small pots into big pots. And each time you pot it up, it gets fresh potting medium. So a new bag of premium potting mix, Australian plant potting mix, so that it's a low phosphorus mix. And the plants will happily keep growing quickly, rapidly, healthily into that new medium, and you can keep potting them up. When you get to the final size, that's where the idea that you might once a year, if you can, and this is where buying a pot that allows you to pull a plant out without doing damage to it, and you can then prune. You can do a root prune and freshen up the potting medium and place it back. Plants will adapt to that. So pots that are shaped like that are no good for that, but pots that are shaped like that are ideal for that, or like that with straight sides. I will suggest too, Peter, this is really for you. If you are buying potting mix which is not the top of the line, or you're making your own, as some people do, the water-saving granules or crystals are really useful in pots, but don't over apply them. You don't want too much water in them. But they are great, especially if you're going away for a week or two in the summer. They are ideal. Also, mulch your pots is the other thing, and generally pebbles. Remember when glass, all those coloured glass was all the rage? I'm showing my age, aren't I? What was that? 2000, late 90s, 2000s. But they were all the go. Pebbles, ideal things to mulch. They can get hot, so the idea is that you don't just have one layer of pebbles. You would have, an inch or two, which will then insulate against having a detrimental warm surface at the top, because you do want mulch to maintain a sort of consistent root temperature. Okay, Peter, anything else? I kind of rambled on that, but I hope I got the gist of what your question was. Let's see. Oh, hi YouTube. Gee, you've come in force now. The YouTube have really taken over. So yeah, I'll take another few comments or questions if you have any. Okay, what I'm going to say, Naomi, my friend has killed heaps of pot plants with pebbles. I reckon they're a bad idea. Okay, I'm guessing that they're using a thin layer of pebbles and in a full sun spot. It's difficult to and tell me if I'm wrong. But that's generally, in my experience, where pebbles don't work. If you're in a full sunspot, I would say pebbles are good, and then on top of that, you could put bigger stones, pieces of stones, so that the stones absorb most of the heat from the sun, and that the pebbles in contact with the potting medium stay pretty cool. It's always a bit of suck it and see with that kind of situation, but pebbles are a good mulch. So are glass, so are anything sort of ceramic too. Any mulch is better than no mulch. Okay, balcony facing west in a white pot with white pebbles. I'm almost going to think, Naomi, because that's a really common kind of issue. Often it'll be something like there just won't be, especially if the plants are mature and quite pot bound, there just won't be enough water being held in the pot, which is again why pulling them out, root pruning, adding some granules and some fresh medium is something that should be being done regularly, and ensuring that you have. So you got to have free drainage, but you also want the medium to retain water. Sounds like they're exclusive, but they're not. You don't want water sitting around in the medium when the plant doesn't want it, but you do want the medium to retain water so that you're so that when the plant needs it, it can use them. And actually, when I used to do a lot of propagation and I used the water saving granules, and I worked for a company that sold them, so I had heaps and heaps available to me. The plants would put roots into those granules, so that when the granules swelled up and there was water there, the plants would take it out, and the granules would reduce until the water had gone back in there again. Yeah, Naomi, there we are. Yeah, pebbles. What I will say too, Naomi, is that I'm always driven by evidence. And one thing I learned as when I had my retail nursery and when I was a sales rep, and I used to do a lot of talks and presentations in garden centres, people are really, really firm about the old wives' tales that are associated with gardening. Now, the problem will be, your friend will be convinced that the problem is the pebbles, because there are pebbles. You can see that there are pebbles. But if you don't pull the plant out of the pot and see what the condition of the soil media is, whether there is whether it's pot bound, sometimes it'll be as simple as they'll go down to the supermarket. And I was guilty of this when I worked for one of those big companies that stock the supermarket, all-purpose garden fertilizer, and it's for sale for $1 a tub or $1.80 a tub or something, and you think, what a bargain. But it's the absolute wrong thing to put on native plants. So it will kill native plants as quick as anything. And often they're not slow release, even though they're made to look like they are. So people think, oh, well, I'll put, two of the measuring spoons on. But what happens is that will often just release quickly all the nutrient and will actually poison the plant. But you never think about that because how could it be? It's fertilizer. So, yeah, a couple of golden rules. If it's cheap, it's probably shit, would be. If it's potting mix and it's cheap, it is shit. And most of the fertilizer that is sold cheaply is great for fruit trees or whatever, or your camellias or fertilising your roses, but don't let them near your grevilleas, your hakeas, or your banksias. And most Australian native plants, even if they're not going to be poisoned by a high phosphorus fertiliser, they're adapted to low nutrient soils. That's just the fact of it, except for the rainforest plants. Let me be clear there. But you can generally say that most Australian plants are adapted to low nutrient soils. So don't over-nutrify them. There we are. Peter, I'm not sure what. Yeah, okay. So I hope I was on the right track about maintaining the potted plants. I think that was what you were getting at, because that's what I always got as a question when I was running the nursery and working in nurseries. Is that people would bring in a plant that was really sick, and it was usually so terribly pot bound. The other thing too is that there are good pots and bad pots. If you are looking and you can, plastic pots I'm talking about, and you buy one that's totally smooth inside and there are no grooves or ridges or anything to encourage the roots, even if they do hit the side and move around. If they find a ridge or a groove that goes down, they go down. Whereas if they get the shiny ones, they'll often be more prone to strangling themselves with circular root growth. So we don't want. Okay, where are we, Naomi? There we go. Yes. Cheap potting mix. I can tell you that cheap potting mix is good if you buy it in bulk and then do the other things like add the slow release fertilizer, add maybe some grit, some stones or pebbles to make it more free draining, and add something like the water crystals. Then you can maybe come out on top. But in general, you are better to buy the top of the line potting mix. And if it's for succulents, buy the succulent mix. If it's for, I don't know, well, the native plant one, without doubt, always buy the native plant one if you're potting up natives. And the all-purpose are pretty good for most other things. Naomi, what have we got here? Funny story. My friend not only killed natives, but killed a pink jasmine. That would suggest to me a pink jasmine would be killed by one of three things. One, over fertilizing, and I would think it would be the cheap fertilizer with the extra 2 heaps of fertilizer, and maybe some liquid fertilizer for good measure later on. That will definitely kill pink jasmine. They're actually really hardy. They will survive a dry period quite long, in my experience, but they don't like being wet. They don't like wet feet. Their roots will rot really quickly. So, yeah. Peter. Yeah, look, Peter, Correas are amazing. Great plants. I would also suggest that you look for some of the small Boronias, and the small Melaleucas. There are so many of them out there too. And if you've got big pots, Hybertia, think about Hybertias as a small shrub to fill the space, or there are some Hybertias which will spill over really nicely. A nice orange one, Hybertia stellaris, is fantastic for pots in a mixed planting. Trying to always recommend things that play nice together in plant timeframes. Just trying to think, and also, Peter, always think too about using ground covers that will spill over into and really underutilized in my experience, and can turn any ugly pot into a really nice pot. If you can't see an ugly pot, but you can see some flowers or some, interesting leaf shape or texture, well, that's a bonus, isn't it? And that's where so many receptacles nowadays are. That if we're recycling or reusing, we can turn anything into a good container that we can hide with a good plant choice. A native violet's easy in pots. Yeah, the basic rule, Naomi, is native violets do like pots, but native violets do not like drying out in pots. Even if you see them out in that dappled woodland kind of thing, it's because the root zone is a fairly consistent temperature that they do nicely. Full sun, I would not recommend, and I would not recommend that that they are in really, really heavy shade. But they are very adaptable, and they're a really good thing to move around too. Native violets are great as an underplanting with something else in the plant, in the pot, but I wouldn't be putting native violets in, say, with a big tufty grass, or maybe some of the grasses. Poas probably be all right, Danthonias, but for something like a big Restio or a big Kangaroo Paw, they're probably going to really outcompete the native violet and suck all the, just outcompete them. So I wouldn't do that. Peter. So regional WA. Tell us where, Peter. Really interested in which area you're in, and you get to use a whole heap of different plants that we may not think about using so much here, especially those amazing hakeas, and then all the Dryandra type of Banksias. And I'm not sure if you know now, Peter, that all the Dryandras are now lumped in. They're now all officially Banksias. Isopogons as well. I mean, you got amazing plants to use in WA. And gee, if I had WA people that I knew were going to be tuning in, I'd do a couple of sessions just on WA plants. So you're 2 hours behind. So what does that make it? It's only 11:30 in the morning. You're only having your morning coffee there, there, Peter. It's nice of you to jump in. All right, let's go. Let's give it another say 5 to 10 minutes before I jump off. So, Peter, have you got any other questions? Peter, if you're a Twitter follower, that's my Twitter handle on the screen there. You need to be following Rob Davis, who's a WA plant and botany genius, for some good tips and some really good pictures that he has in his Twitter. So if you are following me, Peter, send me a tag me or something and let me know that you're on the stream, and I'll make sure you find Rob and a few other of the really good WA plant Twitter folk. And if you're not on Twitter, well, hey, get on there and follow me and do the same thing. Plant Twitter and bird Twitter are good spaces. Right. Just waiting for you guys now. Any other comment, any other question, any other query? Oh, that's good. People are just liking and whatnot the message from hours ago. It's very good. Oh my God. Nick Kyrgios has won, apparently. He's now become the US Open. Is he the favourite? I'm just killing time while I wait for you, folks. Oh, I can't believe it. I can't believe Nick Kyrgios is. Oh my God. He's now the outright favourite to win the US Open. Can you believe that? All right, I've got a question for all of you too. Are there any plants that you're always too scared to use, that you see in the nursery and you think, I'd like to buy those, but then you don't because you don't know anything about them, or you've heard that they're hard or difficult or whatever? We got a bit of a lag on the stream too. I'll take that banner off while we're at it. Who have we got now? Okay, yeah. I'm thinking, Peter, you're meaning about Twitter and whatnot, I'm assuming. It's always good to expand the network. Okay, we're counting down just a few more minutes. Last questions, last comments, or suggestions for next time. I think next week, I'll confirm today, but I'm pretty sure Holly's back on track next week. If you guys that are on, would slipping it back an hour be better for you, Peter? Would you be able to join in if we were... that would begin at 11 o'clock your time in Perth? Or, Peter, would you prefer you missed out earlier on. We were talking about whether a weekend or an evening is better than a weekday. Just quickly give us your thoughts on that, Peter. Okay, Naomi, Kangaroo Paws. Thank you for that, because I love Kangaroo Paws, right? Okay. Kangaroo Paws are easy. But what kills them is too much water and too much food and not giving them enough sunlight. They're one of these ones with their plant labels where the word hardy will be used in them. Kangaroo paws are really adaptable, but a lot of these new, they're not that new anymore, but the cultivar varieties that have been developed can be a little bit temperamental. What I would say is the red and green kangaroo paw can be the most difficult. I would start with the yellow kangaroo paw or the red kangaroo paw and some of the, what were they called, Just Joey and Aussie Paws ranges. Start with the ones that say they are full sun. The ranges are too big for me to just throw out the suggestions, but start with the ones that are full sun and don't overwater them. If they're in a small container, use the water crystals and mulch. They can handle periods of dryness, but they don't like to dry out completely, and they do like consistent root temperatures. Kangaroo paws are adapted for heaths and woodland generally, and dryness is part of their general regime. But native fertilizer is a must, and that's another one where people often forget that they're a native. They're adapted to low nutrient regimes, so don't overfeed them. I used to just sort of use a diluted liquid fertilizer when I was growing them in a commercial setting, and they were really reliable. Quite easy to grow, but I have seen lots of people kill them too. So Naomi's dad, don't treat kangaroo paws as if they're like azaleas and things like that, which just tends to be people will pamper them. Don't pamper them. Don't pamper them. Treat them like agapanthus, right? All right. This is a good question. Thanks for that, Naomi. This is right on point. Okay, terracotta. If you're going to use terracotta, it should be sealed, or it should be glazed on the inside. If it isn't, you can buy something like pot seal or any of those sort of membraney kind of paints to seal the inside, so that otherwise terracotta water will just evaporate out. A terracotta pot that isn't sealed is one where you see it's been watered and got wet, and then it's dried out, and then you see the salt line somewhere around the pot. If you see that on your pot, it isn't sealed. It needs to be sealed. Otherwise, it will just become a very dry hell for the plants. So otherwise, they're fantastic containers. Small terracotta plants, and look, my grandma had hundreds of them too, with geraniums and pelargoniums in them, and they weren't sealed, right? But they were also pampered. They were watered every day and all that kind of stuff. But if she had have been growing grevilleas in them and watering them every day, the grevilleas would have shit themselves, right? So it's horses for courses. If you are growing Mediterranean style herbs and plants in terracotta, lavenders and things like that, they'll probably go fine. But if they're left in full sun and the watering is inconsistent, or if they're sitting in a saucer and they're not draining properly, plants will die. And it's the same as any kind of container, that rule too. If you're sitting in a saucer full of water, that means there's water right through the soil column, and that's going to lead to wet feet, rot, plants dying. can talk about all the ways to recognise what your plant died of in another stream. There's a couple of telltale indicators on a plant that is dying or dying once they're dead. If the leaves are already crusty and brown, you can't tell. But if the leaves are still alive but they're discoloured, we can work out what is the cause in many, many, many cases. So yeah, Naomi, if you are buying pots, if you're buying pots and they're terracotta, or if they're clay and they're cheap and they haven't been properly fired, seal them. Seal them on the inside, so you can use that horrible black sealant paint, the same stuff you use to seal a concrete pond. If it's on the inside, no one can see it, and it will serve its purpose. Thanks, Peter. Yeah, I love the West Australian plants, but I also love to talk about the West Australian plant and what might be the equivalent to use on the eastern seaboard as well, or in the tropical setting too. Great. Did you find him, Peter? If you didn't find Rob, just hit me up on Twitter and I will make sure that you find a couple of the people, and Georgia and a few of the others with great plant pictures and whatnot. And I'll even refer you on to another plant podcast. And look, Peter, I think if there's a demand for it, I'll do more bird / plant / native garden stuff, because that's right where my head is at. So if you guys want it, I'll do it. How's that? Okay, well, we've run over time. I'm going to just one more time for a question or a comment, Naomi. I think Janice has had to run. It was nice to meet you, Pogjava 69 too, from the States. Definitely agree with you about cassowaries. Stay out of the way of cassowaries. If you're out there. All right, who's given us that one? Jennifer and Janice, thumbs up on Facebook. And we've got, Facebook love. Oh, and look at that. My chair has just given up on me by the look of it. How's that? Very, very, very good. Okay. Isn't that embarrassing? My chair fell down. All right. Last chance, last call, as they say in the hotel trade. If you've got any suggestions, let me know, and you can email me, grant@thebirdemergency.com, or tag me or DM me on Twitter, and or on Facebook. I've got Facebook linked in with the Instagram and everything now. And don't forget that every morning we're doing hashtag first seen and heard, where you can share what's in your local patch, the first bird that you see and the first bird that you have heard each morning, or in the afternoon if you don't get up until then. That's all right. Just share the love. Share the love around the world. Okay, well, thanks for all the likes and the love hearts. It's nice, and yeah, great for everyone who's been involved today on YouTube, on Facebook and Twitch. And okay, Peter. So this is a good time for you, is it, Peter? Great. Okay, so 11 morning-y time is a good time. Naomi. Oh, look, they're all coming through. Here we go. First seen brown thornbill, first heard. Which fairy wren? I'm guessing it might have been the superb fairy wren for you, Naomi. Peter, query, kangaroo paws in a pot. Does that mean you going, what? People are growing kangaroo paws in pots? What? Clarify that. You got a couple of minutes, and I've always been a big fan of kangaroo paws. Oh, okay, variegated. Naomi's just told us it's the variegated fairy wren. Okay. Naomi, have you heard or seen the sessions we did on the fairy wrens with the Fairy Wren Project? If you haven't, you must go back and check out the discussion we had with Joe Welkman from the Fairy Wren Project. Peter, tell me what you mean by kangaroo paws in a pot, ? Does that mean you don't realise you can grow kangaroo paws in a pot? If you're going to grow the black kangaroo paw, it's really the only way. I would suggest that you try it first. And if you want to grow the red and green, the Anigovanthus manglesii, I would also only be in Western Australia. You can grow that anywhere, I would say, but over here, I would want to be growing it in a pot. Keep forgetting there's different rules for you over there in the West when it comes to your West Australian plants. You can just stick them in the ground. Any others? Peter, is that you who just followed me on Twitter? I'm guessing it might be. Okay. All right, folks. First seen and heard, hashtag first seen and heard. That's happening on Twitter and Instagram and sometimes on Facebook. I think I'm doing them all most mornings. And of course there will be a new bird emergency out this week. And there'll probably be a bonus episode out this week. And of course when are the next streams? Couple of live streams, Thursday and Friday, happening this week as well. So subscribe on the where are we? Let me put this one up. Subscribe on the YouTube. Shameless shill. You can support me. It's really nice when someone does the buy me a coffee. So buymeacoffee.com/birdemergency or thebirdemergency.com/coffee will take you there. And Holly's not here, but that link will take you to Birds in Backyards. And I think the surveys are still happening for the Birds in Backyard surveys. So get involved, do a backyard survey and contribute with your citizen science to the greater knowledge of our birds and the better decisions for their management and protection, which, hey, basically is what it's all about, right? All right, gang, thanks. Slow start, but gee, that was good. Thanks for being involved, everyone. I'm Grant Williams. This is the Bird Emergency. I am a bird nerd. See you later.